This audio recording is brought to you by thebestdayever.com.
So welcome, everyone. We're here with Dave Lindenbaum, also known as Kombucha Dave. And Dave is here to talk about kombucha and some of his experiences that he's had with kombucha. Dave has launched a new site, GetKombucha.com, which offers some great home brewing sort of technologies and devices. So hopefully we're going to hear what he has to say about kombucha. So thanks so much, Dave, for joining us today.
Lou, it's an absolute pleasure.
When we went out to dinner the other night, you talked about your story, how you came into health and sort of getting involved with the kombucha. Can you tell people a little bit about your story, how you sort of came to this?
Definitely. I wake up every day and I wonder like how I got to be doing this, because my background definitely did not, you know, on paper it's an interesting story because we all have different paths in lives, and my story is basically I was your typical really good student, did tons of sports in high school and went to school, was a finance major and computer systems minor. I've always been interested in health, kind of like on a very aesthetic, superficial level, and definitely not alternative modalities until quite some time later on in life. After college, I got a job on Wall Street working for a very well-known financial institution. And keep in mind, this was several years ago, where that was a coveted job, quite different than, I guess, what's going on today in the world. And I wish I could say I was psychic and I knew that something was going to be up, so I better leave that industry. But no, I just, I did it for about 2.5, 3 years. 9/11 happened during that time and shook things up in my mind, kind of thinking like, how do I really want to live my life and use my time. So I left, and my poor parents, you can imagine their surprise, I just kind of walked away from it, traveled for about 3.5, 4 years personally and as a tour guide. And I came to the conclusion that I wanted to work for myself in some type of capacity where I was helping people, If I look back on all my jobs, and the most one I had at the time working was really in those jobs where I was helping people, even as a waiter or a bartender back in college. Those were the jobs that I really enjoyed, sparkled. It was you worked really hard, but you just felt really good. So out of nowhere, I decided to move across country, go from New York to California. And that in itself was a wonderful experience. And when I came out here, I was fortunate enough to meet a gentleman who kind of took me under his wing in the tea industry. He owned a tea company. He's a fantastic person, and his background was more in wellness. He went to school for Ayurveda. For those that aren't familiar with Ayurveda, we could do a whole new interview on that, but it's an Indian wellness system, very, very complementary, I guess, to traditional Chinese medicine, but from an Ayurvedic standpoint, with doshas and constitutions instead of a yin and yang, and Jing.
So was that your first introduction into sort of alternative modalities of health?
Yeah, it's so funny because in my eyes it was. Though now looking back and talking to my friends, all of my friends are saying, "Oh yeah, like no wonder why you're you're doing this. Like you used to be like so into this stuff." And looking back at my life, I guess. I just assumed that everyone read those books, like, on wellness and meditation and qigong, and like, those were the books like when I went to the library I would take out. But I never thought that. I just assumed like that's what everyone took out, and read up on and got into. So it was the first time I think. Okay, this is probably the best way to explain it. It's the first time I was consciously aware that that's like my thing, I'm willing to bet that if people that are listening to this interview, if they look back on their lives and they really challenge themselves, the point that everything kind of clicked for them, if they dig a few chapters deeper, they've probably had that itty-bitty seed planted way earlier that they didn't even realize. So for me, though, it was like, some people call it an awakening, some people call it a realization. So for me, it was meeting this gentleman and working alongside of him. And at first I was the business guy. My background was in business and operations and boring things like that. I say that affectionately, of course, but to work in any capacity, you need to learn, whatever industry you're in, whatever your job is in that industry. It's so beneficial to know the whole, even though if you might be a little part. I began just intensive training, and I'm not a sponge. I'm like a ShamWow, I'm absorbing way beyond sponge capacity. So I just got into it. I was, working later just to do tea tastings and really getting into the herbs, and I was fortunate. I had one-on-one training with someone who I really was a tea master, and you know the person's a tea master when you call him a tea master, and he's so humble and saying, no, I'm not a tea master. It was just a really good time in my life. But oddly enough, I know I should be speaking about kombucha. We didn't offer kombucha because kombucha is a completely different modality of teas, so to speak. I mean, it really is a completely separate category. I mean, when we talk about teas, we talk about Camellia sinensis, and all tea, by definition, needs to come from this form of plant. There's different varieties of Camellia sinensis plants, just like you have different varieties of grapes, which make up different varieties of wine. So we're talking about oolongs, pu'ers, black teas, green teas, white teas, but all of them come from this Camellia sinensis. When we talk about kombucha is really, though it does involve tea, it's really the process that makes it. But anyway, so I was first exposed to kombucha with this gentleman, but not really at work. We went out for like a lunch break. At lunch, I looked at the menu and I was like, kombu what? Like kombu who? Like what is this? And he knew a little bit about it, just from I guess his tea knowledge. But he said, yeah, why don't you try some? And man, I tell you, if I didn't experience it myself, I wouldn't be comfortable. I wouldn't even believe other people than speaking it about their own experiences, especially the first time they really enjoy this elixir. I took a few sips in the conversation. We keep talking, and I just paused and looked at him, and I said, "Dude, I think I'm drunk." And not in a not in like my speech was slurred, but that feeling of just of a whoa, and since working in the wellness industry now, and discovering all these other botanicals and herbs and also practices, looking back now, the word drunk isn't the best way, but at the time that was my only way to describe it. And we get a lot of people feel that, and we get questions all the time, like, how much alcohol is in kombucha? Because I took this and I was like, on cloud nine. So that was my first whoa moment. My second whoa moment was about 25 minutes later. The meal was done, and we ate. Listen, it's as much as we try to be disciplined in what we know is the right way, in terms of how we eat and how we wake up and live. The fact is that a company was still a company that at that time we were experiencing tremendous growth, so we tend to eat lunch very quickly, and it's not recommended, but sometimes it happens. Yeah, we rushed through lunch, and I've had an acid reflux problem it was diagnosed when I was I guess 19, 20, but I've had it for as long as I can remember, and I used to eat food and it would come up on me. And maybe it needs to be said, because if people are listening to this, and if someone, because I share that with people, and I get, oh, it's gross, but I also get a few people that pull me aside after, and they say, yeah, that happens to me too. And it's,